Buenas noches. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last of the 2015 UM Community Lecture Series on birds inside and out. And my name is Eric Green. I gave the talk last week, but I'm going to be doing the emceeing for tonight. Just a little bit of business. As Linda's been really good at reminding you, please everybody turn off your cell phones right now. And tonight is a really special talk. It's the last of the 17th annual community lecture series. And after the lecture, there will be a reception with wine and cheese and goodies and stuff and some really interesting specimens down on this floor at the far end in the 300. Just walk that way and you'll find it. There will also be DVDs of the entire series available for purchase, and so there's information outside. So you can get information on getting DVDs. There'll be $10 per set, so it will have all 6 on that. And MCAT on channel 189 will be rebroadcasting all of these starting on March 30th and repeating the following Friday and running for 6 weeks. So they'll be viewable on MCAT as well. And there's information on that as well. Also, the organizers of the community lecture series would love to get feedback from you on ideas you have on good themes or good topics for future years. So there's cards, and if you've got ideas, you can fill those out, because the organizing committee would love to hear your thoughts on things you'd like to hear about. As you know, these are 6 lectures with a theme that runs through all of them. One of the special things we've tried to do this year in the series, Birds Inside and Out, is sort of marry art and science. And so we've been having wonderful readings of poems of Eduardo. There, is that better? Oh, there we go. Do I need to rewind the tape and go back to the beginning? No? Okay, good. We've been having poems read by Eduardo Chirinos, who's a wonderful world-renowned poet that we're lucky enough to have here at University of Montana. And he'll read right now his poem about ostriches tonight. And he's got a book that are of poems of animals and birds. And they're illustrated by prints by our own David Lusk. David, stand up here. And so David is a graduate of the arts program here and does wonderful woodcuts and other sort of stuff. So Eduardo.
Do we have an office? Okay. Good evening. The poem of tonight is actually a lament. The lament of a very big bird, the ostrich, or it's a variation of ostrich. No change?
No change, I hope. You okay. Read, I'll do the computer.
Well, the ostrich, or in Latin, Struthio camelus. Struthio means in English sparrow, and camelus means camello or camel, a very strange mix. Struthio camelus. Aristóteles pensaba que era un híbrido de gorrión y de camello. ¿Yo qué le iba a responder? Era una voz autorizada, la voz de la verdad y la ciencia. Y por siglos me quedé con ese nombre. La religión y el mito no hicieron nada por librarme de mi condición monstruosa. No los culpo. Soy enorme, no alzo vuelo. Mis pezuñas son hendidas, mi alto cuello desnudo de plumas. Y para colmo, tengo pestañas, igual que los cuadrúpedos. Me presto, pues, a las más extravagantes invenciones, que devoro hierba ardiente, que incubo mis huevos en la arena, que oculto la cabeza ante el menor peligro. La religión fue todavía más dura. Cuando Job lamenta sus desgracias, dice: parezco hermano de chacales, amigo de avestruces. ¿Tengo yo algo tenebroso, algo demoníaco? Hoy la ciencia es más neutra, pero no más compasiva. Grupo, rátidas. Carne, roja y comestible. Altura máxima, 3 metros. Muchas gracias.
Now our very own Jeff Bodnock to read an English translation.
Aristotle thought I was a cross between a sparrow and a camel. What was I supposed to tell him? He was an authority, the voice of truth and knowledge. But I've been stuck with this name for centuries now. Religion and myth have done nothing to free me from this monstrous existence. I can't blame them. I'm huge, unable to take flight, have cloven hoofs and a long featherless neck. To top things off, I have eyelashes like quadrupeds. I lend myself, therefore, to the strangest misconceptions that I eat burning steel, incubate my eggs in the sand, and hide my head at the first sign of danger. Religion has been harder on me yet. When Job laments his misfortunes, he wails, I am a brother to jackals and a companion to ostriches. Is there something dark or diabolical about me? Nowadays, science is more neutral, if not more compassionate. Group, retites. Meat, red, and edible. Maximum height, 9 feet.
Right. Tonight, we're really excited to have our last speaker in this series, Emily Graslie, with us. And this is a little bit of a departure for us. Emily is an undergraduate student here in fine arts and painting. She graduated in 2011, so she's not a faculty member like the rest of us who have been here. But Emily, as you'll find out in just a minute, discovered the Phil Wright Museum, which is a collection, a museum here on campus. So how many of you have ever heard of the Phil Wright Museum? Oh, good, very good. How many of you knew that it was the official vertebrate collection for the state of Montana? Okay, slightly fewer, but still pretty good. Emily's talk tonight is going to be titled, What Good is a Dead Bird? And she's going to talk a lot about the value, the scientific value, and other values of collections. And all of the previous speakers in this series have used in one way or another specimens or information from museum collections, from dead birds. So, for example, Ken Dial kicked off this talk, this seminar series, talking about evolution of flight in birds. And so he showed images of things like this, and this is a chicken, or was a chicken, but from our Phil Wright Museum. Brett Tobalski very elegantly with dried wings of birds and olive oil and light shows demonstrated how air moves over airfoils in a very elegant way. And so this is a specimen from our Phil Wright Museum. And I last week talked about my work with robotic raptors and how animals have a distant early warning system. So here's a robotic Cooper's hawk. that is a specimen from our Phil Wright Museum. So it's got a little motor and computer inside, so it can, it only says no, unfortunately. It's a very negative hawk, but it can waggle its head in the, its tail in the affirmative. The point is that all of us in this whole seminar series, and Kriya and Dick as well, have all of the science we've talked about has been based in large part, the very foundation has been collections, museum collections, and so forth. And Emily has, she discovered and fell in love with the Phil Wright Museum, and while she was here, she developed, she started blogging about her experiences, dissecting rotting dead wolves and things like that, and with the help of Hank Green and Michael Aranda, who are here in the audience tonight, developed a YouTube channel called Brain Scoop, and that has gone viral. And Emily has since been snatched up by the the Chicago Field Museum, which is one of the oldest and biggest museums in the country. And she became the first chief curiosity curator. And she's sort of a goddess of social media. And her job, everything she does basically goes viral. And her job is to help get out the word to the general public using social media about the exciting science and research that goes on in museums. Dick Hutto has put together, since Emily's such an unusual speaker in this, Dick Hutto has put together a short little video montage just to help introduce Emily, and then we'll go into her talk.
Hi, and welcome to the final installment of this year's Alumni Lecture Series. We thought we'd put together a little video to provide a bit of background on tonight's speaker, Emily Graslie. Emily graduated from the University of Montana with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting in 2011. While she was in her senior year, a friend of hers asked if she'd ever been in the P.L. Wright Bird and Mammal Museum. "What's the Wright Museum?" was Emily's response. The first time she walked into the museum, she was totally taken aback by the wealth of material staring her in the face. She couldn't believe her eyes, her nose, her fingers. Things didn't end there. Emily's a different sort of person. She immediately asked if she could volunteer to help, just to get to hang out in the place. The curator, Dave Dyer, was all for that. This was the beginning of what was to become a 2-year love affair with the Wright Museum. As I said, Emily is not like most. She's a curious sort, and also extremely creative. So she not only used her art background to draw museum material, but she became very interested in learning more about the stories behind each item. And so she began to write a Tumblr blog about how cool all the stuff is in the Wright Museum. She needed a name for her page, so she chose Brain Scoop, after a little scraping tool that museum preparators use to help remove brains from the inside of a skull before putting the skull into a beetle colony for a thorough cleaning. Almost immediately, she got phenomenal response from folks all over the place. Not hundreds, but thousands of hits when she posted something. Emily was doing wonderful things for the Wright Museum and was getting quite a bit of attention on campus. For example, she and the museum were featured in one of President Engstrom's video updates. She even made a video or two of her own and was featured by Brady Moore in the Montana Kaiman's 1 in 15,000 series, which highlights the work of a staff member or student on the UM campus. It was then that YouTube educator Hank Green and producer Michael Aranda discovered Emily and offered to help her launch her own YouTube channel about the goings-on in the Wright Museum. The videos became overnight sensations, with each one reaching into the hundreds of thousands of hits. The reason was written so well in one magazine article that I read about the Brain Scoop, and it said simply, "There's something about Emily." Emily was becoming especially popular with young women, especially those in middle and high school. And the Brain Scoop was certainly one of the best things ever to have happened to UM and the museum. Ever. Well, The Chicago Field Museum caught wind of how special Emily's videos were, and they scooped her up faster than you can say brain scoop. She was hired to become the museum's first ever chief curiosity correspondent to promote outreach for what is one of the world's finest museums. Among the dozens of topics Emily addresses, one video in particular struck a chord with folks. It was about some of the shocking and sexist emails that she and her show receives. It also made her wonder why relatively few women in STEM fields run YouTube channels. She asked, what's preventing women from reaching the same number of people as their male counterparts? Could it have to do with the fact that we have a fear of feedback from our subscribers and commenters because we're afraid that our audience is more focused on our appearance than on the quality of our content? That show pushed 1 million hits and received coverage from all the major news agencies around the world. Emily Graslie's Brain Scoop is, quote, one of the warmest, slyest video blogs on the web, wrote NPR science reporter Robert Krulwich. Let's close this intro by listening to Emily herself for a few minutes.
The first time I came in here, I was a semester away from graduating with my studio art degree. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know if I was going to have a job after I graduated. I didn't really think that science was for me, you know, and I walked in here and all of a sudden it all seemed to make sense. Everything I used to not really understand about science or biology in a broader context seemed to all be a lot more clear once I actually came into a place where you could see it physically and you could touch these things and you could interact with them and you could get up close. It wasn't just looking at pictures and textbooks. It wasn't just looking at slides underneath a microscope. It was actually being really close with these objects. And it was this epiphany, like, I can do science. I can do science. Yeah, science is a thing that I like. I mean, I couldn't change my major, so I got my art degree, and I didn't have a job for a long time, so I just would volunteer here. I got a job as a baker, and I would bake during the morning and then come here during the day and do specimen preparation and then have to go to my night shift in baking, so I'd make a bunch of food and then come here and like clean bones and then go to work and I'd, you know, be making sandwiches and realize like 20 minutes before I had just been pulling tissue off of a squirrel or whatever. And eventually I just stopped going to my baking job and got into grad school instead so I could stay here. This is like my museum. It's not mine. I don't feel like an ownership of the objects. I feel kind of an ownership of the idea of this place. I've put so much time and energy and love into this collection, and I feel like I've been helping to look after all of these animals, all of these specimens, and all of the data associated with them for 2.5 years, nonstop. I'm in here all the time. Until the Brain Scoop started, I was in here 40 to 50 hours a week, regardless of whatever else I had to do in my life. I don't think there are a lot of museums in the world where people get the kind of opportunity that I've had, where someone trusts me so much to just let me do so many projects on my own and let me learn on my own. And you just don't get that kind of opportunity.
What is it that you're doing now?
Well, I asked our curator, Dave, before he left, if it would be okay to fill out a specimen invoice for loan to take the raccoon with me to the Field Museum. And I called the Field Museum to make sure that they could make appropriate accommodations to house him temporarily as a loan from the University of Montana. And he's been approved.
How do you think Soon Raccoon feels about it?
You know, he's been pretty quiet about the whole ordeal. They have a lot of really nice raccoons at the Field Museum. I'm sure he'll make a lot of friends. It still has brains on it.
So now Emily's going to tell us about what good is a dead bird.
I don't even know if I have anything else to add to that. I had never seen that video that Dick had put together, so I'm just enjoying that moment a little bit. I just want to start off by saying that this is probably the biggest honor I've been afforded in the last couple of years since I've been doing this. Sorry, I gotta stop it. It's gonna autoplay. So give me a heads up if it advances again. I'm watching it. But it's truly an honor to have been asked to come back to the University of Montana. The clip that you guys saw in the video of when I was walking out with, a taxidermied raccoon in your arms, as you do whenever you leave a new job or an old job, the door closed behind me and I that was the last moment. I didn't ever know when I moved to the Field Museum if I would get a chance to come back and visit this collection. And I was just there yesterday. So walking back in, for the first time after being in a collection like that was really a humbling experience. And I'm just incredibly honored to have been asked to be the final speaker in the series. So thank you for having me. I'm a little bit nervous. I've also never given a talk where I've recognized so many people in the audience. So I have so many feelings. But not to restate too much of what was just shared in the video, I do want to share a little bit from my personal perspective of how I ended up studying art and why I care so much about dead animals, because that's certainly not something that you sign up for on your what I want to be when I grow up list as a grade schooler. So to go back a couple of years, I was studying art here on campus, and I had never really thought of myself as a scientist or anybody even capable of thinking like a scientist. My mother is a physician, and as far as I was concerned, everything that she knew was far over my head, and my puny little brain would never be able to comprehend everything she was capable of doing and synthesizing. So I was a little bit intimidated by the sciences. I knew she worked a lot, and I also knew I didn't want to be in school forever, because my impression of school was high school in rural South Dakota, and I knew I didn't want to endure that any longer than I needed to. So when it came to deciding on a major, I chose art because I saw it as a great way to communicate a lot of my emotions, a lot of what I was thinking about current events. And my father was a rancher in South Dakota, so I spent a lot of time on our ranch growing up. And I spent even more time trying to decipher his stoicism in a way that, he and the people of the community near Faith, South Dakota, devoted so much of their time and energy and expertise to trying to master something that would always be impossible because they had to compensate for the environment. And the environment doesn't care if you have put all of your money into this year's crops. A storm is going to blow through and obliterate your life's, or your, the work that you've put in over the last year. And the way people dealt with that, and the fact that they stayed in these communities despite opportunities to leave, or maybe they didn't have opportunities, was something I wanted to capture in my artwork. So long story short, I thought the best way to do that was to literally put it in your face. So I focused on large landscape paintings. And this is my senior thesis work that I focused on my senior year, called 20 Miles East of Faith, just to give you an idea of how far away I was from thinking anything scientific. But there was one day my fall semester, I was sitting in a advanced drawing class, talking with my friend Katie Zimmerman. And Katie had a phenomenal impact on my life. I was sitting there and I was kind of frustrated because, landscape painting was cool and I liked it, but it seemed to lack content. It seemed to lack a little bit of, I don't know why it's doing this. If anyone can fix that, that'd be great. My artwork focusing on landscape seemed to lack a little bit of a spark. It didn't seem contemporary enough. I could make it really big, but there's only so big you can go. before you stop making a statement and you're just kind of annoying. I just paused it for a second. Somebody wants to fix it, that'd be great, because I'm a little too nervous to figure it out right now. But anyway, so I was talking with Katie Zimmerman, and she had brought this amazing series into our critique one day. And this is, an incredibly complicated technique called encaustic, where it's a mixture of illustration and wax painting with hot wax, which seemed about as stressful as cooking, which I can't handle because there are too many hot elements. But in addition to it, her experimenting with this different art form, she was also doing informed art. So this is depicting the evolution of the feather, which is something, before seeing her work, I had never even thought about before. I had never thought how feathers evolved. I hadn't even thought about feathers, how they grew out of a body of a bird. And I was filled with such a sense of awe in that. I don't know what science class she had been offered as an art major, but I didn't get that science class. And so then all of a sudden I'm indignant because I want everything to be fair and special. So I was like, Katie, where did you go to learn about this? And she said that she had been volunteering in the geology collection or going to visit the zoological collection across campus. And so as a senior, that was the first I ever heard about the Phil Wright Museum. And I instantly knew it seemed like I had been missing out on something. And again, I wanted everything to be fair. Like if something cool is happening, I want the invitation. So I talked with Katie, and she had mentioned that there was this comparative anatomy collection and zoological collection on campus that art majors could use in order to inform their work. And I thought, that is exactly what I need. Because I can go and I can look at pictures of prairie storms all day, and I can try to watch them come in. But I'm pretty limited in my ability to actually bring them close to home and get a real representation. So I thought maybe I would try something else. So I had a couple of credits to fill, and I wanted to go check this place out to see if it was something that would be good for me. So and just to warn you, I do like dead things, and there are dead things mentioned in this talk, so I threw this slide up to give you a heads up. The next couple of slides might involve a little bit of blood, so you feel free to look away. It's your warning. It's our grossometer, and there they are. So as it kind of happens, at the same time, I was working at the UC Market, and I had a coworker named, thank you so much.
I'm just going to, if it goes forward, I'll back it up.
Great.
When you need me to go forward.
There you go. Do it. I'll just do the boop, 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 boop. Half of this song is in beats. It's presentation. Anyway, so I had a coworker who worked with me at the campus convenience store. Her name was Emily Menigan, and she was a science major, and I didn't know what that meant, but we were friends on Facebook, and she had been posting these shocking pictures to her public Facebook, which I found to be pretty fascinating. I'm going to keep talking, just ignore the man behind the curtain. She had been posting those photos to her Facebook, and I was so kind of shocked and surprised and almost delighted by them that I started asking. She's like, oh, I'm at the zoological collection. I was like, I need to find out where this place is because all the action's happening over there, and I'm left out. And you can also actually see the exact time and date in which my life changed forever, which was October 27, 2010 at 8:12 p.m., in which I had somewhat, regretted my lack of science classes in my liberal arts background. And so after talking with Emily, I managed to convince her with a little bit of begging and maybe bribing with some Cheetos that she ought to let me come visit one of these necropsies that she was performing. So she did, and I'll never forget the first time I actually walked into this collection I had heard so much about. Because from the outside, it didn't look, depending on how you looked at it, it was either was an amazing wonderland of opportunity or it was just a bunch of cases of dead animals. And I went with the first in that I had such a visceral reaction to seeing taxidermied specimens, but also just every surface of this place was covered in some aspect of science, some aspect of something that I had only ever experienced by watching National Geographic. And I suddenly knew that I had some had to make up for some lost time. So she gave me a short tour, brought me to the preparation lab, and handed me a Ziploc baggie that had this pretty soggy-looking dead mouse in it. And she said, "Would you like to prepare a mouse for the collection?" And I said, "Oh, no, you forgot. I'm not a scientist." And she said, No, it's okay. I'll walk you through the steps." She's like, "It's like kind of a gross craft project." I'm like, "Well, I was pretty good at home ec. This can't be that much different." So she walked me through the steps of how you take a dead mouse, what was essentially, could have been thrown in the trash, left to rot in the wild, and how you can turn it into a viable specimen for research. And all of a sudden, I felt more of a sense of ownership and pride over this mouse than I had ever done over a piece of artwork. And my first reaction was to think that I might be a little psychopathic. I was like, this isn't normal. I shouldn't enjoy taking apart this dead animal and looking at its insides and pulling out its heart and trying to figure out how its little heart beats so much, and oh my God, what a fragile creature, and everything is light, and life is so precious and beautiful. I thought certainly there was something wrong with me, but it turns out that what I was really feeling was that I had contributed. I contributed to the world in a way that was tangible, and that this specimen now can go to live on in a collection. You can still go check it out in the Phil Wright Museum. It's still there, Western Jumping Mouse. Can't remember the specimen number, but it got cataloged, and now it's a viable data marker for what could be hundreds of years. And that was when my life kind of changed. So I continued to do artwork as an internship in the Phil Wright Museum, practicing scientific illustration, and I did a series of paintings that were all about osteopathologies of vertebrate specimens in Montana. So essentially, I was taking animals that had gotten beat up or had sustained some kind of injury or disease and had persevered and had survived, because I thought how amazing. Well, not this guy. This guy got shot and he was just done for good. But the rest of them, it was so amazing to me that an animal could get a foot caught in a trap and shoo its hand out. And I know this sounds really gross and weird, but the fact that years would have had to have passed for that wound to have healed, and imagining the life of that animal in the Montana wilderness and kind of just suffering and still having to fight for life was so inspiring to me. So that's kind of how I started, and gradually I just got involved in the collection. I wanted to know more of these specimens. I wanted to know more of their individual stories. Here's a picture of me that was in the slideshow previously for the Montanan magazine. So I had gradually began to understand that there was quite a backlog of work that needed to be done for this collection. It had been vastly understaffed for decades. When I came in, there was one part-time curator who was spending the rest of his time over at the herbarium, and I was seeing such a potential for this collection, not only for art majors, not only for wildlife biology majors, but for education, for outreach, and really for artists too. I wanted to facilitate more classes to come over and borrow our specimens, and I wanted to tell the stories of these animals, because what ends up from the outside, just looking like a bunch of dead animals, is actually like the history of Montana's natural history, and in some cases, other countries and other cities and other states, the natural history of our world was in this one room that was getting so little attention. So in addition to doing artwork, I started a blog and became really interested in publicizing it. In fact, I became pretty voracious in the point where I got really obnoxious, and friends started telling me, like, Emily, you got to give it a rest. I know we all know we don't know what we're going to do after we graduate, but come on. And I didn't give up. I felt pretty strongly about it, and so I started a Tumblr, which is a kind of a blog site. And I just started documenting the day-to-day happenings of this collection, how the specimens were being used, what they needed, the problems we were having. And I got the attention, or we got the attention of a local man, Hank Green. It's hard to summarize who Hank Green is, because I remember the day that I got this opportunity, and that I had watched Hank and these videos he had been producing online. Primarily they're educational videos, but they're also really entertaining, and he was reaching hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And I had totally forgotten that he happened to live here in Missoula. So he had recently launched a new educational channel called Crash Course, or SciShow. I can't remember what this was for, to be honest. I'm sorry, Hank. But he had somehow found out about our museum and had contacted our curator. And Dave came to me and he was like, do you know who the Vlog brothers are? And I was like, yes, I'm aware of the Vlog brothers. Why? Who's asking? Because why would you know about them? And he said, his company was interested in coming to borrow some specimens from the collection and film here as a backdrop for an episode that they were doing. And I about just threw up out of excitement right there. And I said, yes, this sounds like an amazing opportunity to really get the word out there. So Hank came by one June afternoon, and I can't remember ever being so excited to show the museum to somebody who would get it, somebody who could see the beauty and potential for this collection, and somebody who could maybe help us get the word out there. So Hank and I filmed this episode, and I just pestered him pretty much for the entire afternoon and was like, do you want to watch me cut up some dead stuff in the lab? It could be really fun. You want to film it? I don't know. And he emailed me later being like, I think we're on to something. Let me think about it. And a couple of months later, he called me again to come back and film. And I thought, honestly, he came with Michael Aranda, his film guy, and I remember asking Michael, do you want a tour before we get started filming? And Hank's like, no, we're going to wait to start until we have mics on. And I was like, what do you mean until we have mics on? And it turned out that Hank wanted me to give him a tour, and we were going to film it, and I wasn't prepared, and then it happened, and then it went online on a Friday and got hundreds of thousands of views, and by Monday he had emailed me being like, so, you want to do this, like, for real? Like, do you want to have your own show? And I didn't think twice about it. I said yes. I'm pretty impulsive in that way. I was thrilled by the opportunity, so we started the Brain Scoop here in the Phil Wright Museum and filmed for months, probably for the first 6 months of the show's history, just talking about the collection and the possibilities. And eventually, the museum, I went to go visit the Chicago Field Museum. A fan had been a longtime member, and they did this really crazy thing where at the Field Museum they'll open up the behind the scenes so you can come and you can visit and meet the curators and hang out with the specimens. And so this fan had been like, Emily, why don't you go see a real museum? Because she had seen that, like, the Phil Wright Museum has 24,000 specimens, where the Field Museum has 27 million, in addition to countless numbers of curators, active researchers, and collections managers. And so that was like, Emily goes to the big city. I think it was the first time I ever rode on public transportation, and maybe the second time I had ever taken a cab, and definitely the first time I had ever, seen a building like the Field Museum. And I was there for a couple of days, and on day 3, they had invited me in for coffee to talk with some of the senior executives. And I didn't think twice about this. I was like, yeah, senior executives would want to talk to some joker from Montana. They wanted to get my impression about Members Night. And I showed up, and I remember having this conversation with Bill Stanley, who's a collections curator, and he was like, Emily, we really like what you do with the internet and with the blogs and with the YouTubes. It'd be really cool if we could do something like this here. I don't think he said it like that, but that's how I remember it. I was eating a cookie because I was like, oh, sweet, free cookies. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, Bill, that would be really awesome. You guys have so much potential. We could do so much with the Film Museum, but like, imagine what you guys could do here. It would be awesome. He's like, yeah, we just got to find somebody who's really passionate about this and who's good at talking about it. And I was like, oh, whatever. You got like 8 colleges within 2 blocks of this place. You could like acting majors. You got comedy clubs. You could totally find somebody. She's like, well, we think it would be you. And I was like, oh, and I almost choked on my cookie. I slowly looked around this room, and all these people were quietly nodding, like knowingly. And I think I said yes even before I went back to consult with Hank and Michael. Sorry, Hank and Michael, but I kind of signed up, and I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. I want this opportunity. So the Brain Scoop moved to the Field Museum, and now it is the largest in terms of views and subscribers of any YouTube show in the world. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Woo! Hey! Not that a lot of other museums are trying. So, since I've moved to the Field Museum, I threw this up there because I've also won a lot of awards that nobody else was competing for. People just seem really excited about this idea. They seem excited that that somebody like me who doesn't have a science background but just who's genuinely interested in science and who wants to share knowledge and appreciation of the natural world with others, and they're like, oh yeah, it sounds like a great idea. So I take a special pride in probably being the only person to ever get Cosmopolitan to run a picture of domesticated beetles and a desiccated squirrel on their site. Woo, Cosmo, yeah, switching it up. So long story short, I'm not, that was just all building up to kind of what I do today and why I think museums are so important for a number of reasons. I'm going to give a couple of examples about what really got me invested in the Phil Wright Museum here and then how that actually applies to birds. So excuse a couple mammal examples. If you ask a scientist why museums are important, this is the kind of answer that you're going to get. Permanent and well-supported museum or natural history collections provide a solid foundation for the process of systematic research through creation of an empirical record which validates our understanding of the biosphere. That is 100% accurate. I also need to take a nap after reading a sentence like that. So museums are important for that reason, for that they are the taxonomic basis for our understanding of the biosphere. But how can you get a 13-year-old girl to care about that? How can you get a 70-year-old woman to care about that? How can you get anybody in between to care? Not just, I don't know why I gave 2 women examples in a row. How can you get anybody period to care if they don't have a background in science? So what got me to care about museums are examples like this. So, and here's a little bit of a history lesson. William Temple Hornaday was probably America's first conservationist, and this was a man who was working for the Smithsonian in the late 1880s. He came out to Montana because he was seeing that the American bison was rapidly getting hunted towards extinction, and their solution for that, when you don't have cameras or phones available, the best way to preserve the image or essence of something is to go shoot the last of the live ones and then mount them and put them on public display. So that's exactly what he got commissioned to do by the Smithsonian. This comic accompanies one of the books that he wrote, which was a comic from the late 1800s, and it just shows a bunch of mallard ducks. By the 1920s, they're abundant. By the 1930s, if you shoot them all, by the 1940s, they're going to go in a case with extinct American species. You know, the wild duck, the dodo, and I don't even know if that's a dodo, some other animal. Yeah, there you go. And then the buffalo. So that's what he projected to be the future of bison in America. These are the bison that he went out and he procured for the Smithsonian, and they became one of the first, or they were the first 4-sided dioramas ever in the world. You know, this was a man who took a group of 6 bison, you know, a number of juveniles, females, and adult males, and he thought they might be the last wild bison. He taxidermied them, and he thought they were so important. They went on display. They were on a prominent display at the Smithsonian, seen by millions of people up until about the 1950s. I mean, one of them was reported to have been the inspiration of the buffalo head penny, like any number of, they've been on flags. They're a huge part of America's history. And in the 1950s, they were de-accessioned by the Smithsonian. They wanted to update their displays, and they're like, what do we do with these guys? It's not like you just put them in a closet. So they got in touch with some of the curators here at the University of Montana, and they came back to the Philip L. Wright Zoological Museum. And then they immediately went into storage, because we didn't know what to do with bison. And they were lost for decades. And it wasn't until the 1990s where a journalist from Eugene, Oregon found out about this story and came to come find them. And he found some of them in stores. Some of them had been badly damaged. They needed conservation work. Long story short, they got some funds. They pulled their stuff together, and then now they're on display in Fort Benton, Montana. But they're still a part of the Phil Wright collection here. And we have one of the skulls that I put in a tiny little exhibit that you can see on the first floor of the Health Sciences building. And that's one of the skulls that Hornaday picked up in the 1880s. And for a long time it was used at, just in random classes, and I found it and I'm like, this is amazing artifact. This is an amazing part of America's history. We have Hornaday to thank for the American bison range. You know, this is something that's in our backyard, and I thought that story was so compelling and so important. So that was the kind of thing that I would write about in my blog. To bring it back to birds a little bit, one of the anecdotes people like to share a lot is the use of DDT and its negative impact on raptor species just in America. We had no idea the effects of pesticide or the effects that they were having
on wildlife until you started getting an incredible amount of nesting failures. All of a sudden, you know, any kind of raptor species and other birds were becoming less prolific. And there was no way to actually identify what was having, or whether or not DDT was having the cause until biologists went back to museum collections and tested the thickness of eggs that had been collected before the use of DDT and then after, and found that after DDT was employed, eggs were thinning. So that was resulting in the nesting failures. So that's one really good example of how museums are important and how they, the information that they have can inform not just how we deal with wildlife, but how we deal with agriculture. And I like that example, but it's also 40 years old. So how are museums having a positive impact today? I'm not entirely sure why I threw this in here other than to demonstrate. I've been spending a lot of time in the bird preparation lab. And I did an episode called Where'd You Get All Those Dead Animals, where I go more into depth of how museums are important and where we get our specimens. And that is a major question that people have. So the Phil Wright has 24,000 animals, but where did they come from? And with the Field Museum with their 27 million, was somebody out there like in a net in a field or with a shotgun trying to blast all of these animals? No, I mean, so collecting expeditions happen, yes, but the majority of them come to us from a variety of ways. And one of them is by window kills and specimens that your cat brings in when you let your cat outside. And you wouldn't think that there would be a significant number, but this is a representation of the different species of birds that fly into downtown Chicago businesses every year. So up to 70 different or more, 70 different species of birds that are migrating through and going up along Lake Michigan as a major flight path are hitting these buildings and dying because they've been migrating through this region for hundreds of thousands of years, and all of a sudden in the last 80 years a bunch of humans erect these massive buildings with reflective windows and the birds just don't have time to adapt. So to date, more than 68,000, and the number is probably closer to 75,000 birds in the last 30 years have been salvaged just from the streets and the windowsills of Chicago. Well, what do we do with that information? We have a group of volunteers that will go out and they will patrol a certain building and collect the bird on the date, identify the species, and identify which building it is, and then all of those birds come to the Field Museum. So that's what I was preparing in the other slide. So how do we use this information? What good is a dead bird like that? Primarily, so that's the obvious way that we can use the information from these birds, or what birds are actually migrating through this area. That's kind of obvious. Your bird hits a window and they're like, what is it? Okay, that's good information, but how am I going to use that information? It can be useful from one year, but it actually becomes more and more useful the more years you continue to do these collections, because one year you can have some type of meadowlark coming through, and the next year it's not, and then you have a baseline for that study. Another reason is the time of year these migrations occur, which again might seem obvious, but when you keep such good data sets, you can say the first month in March we were getting a lot of these western tanagers, for instance, here in Montana, and then a year or two later you start noticing that the western tanagers are either migrating sooner or later. Well, what is that telling you about the climate, and how can we use that information to inform us about climate change? That's a scary word, climate change. To advance a little bit, the tissue samples that you can take from these birds, now that technologies have improved, we're not just looking at the morphology of the birds, we're not just identifying them, but we're actually able to take tissue samples and store their genomic data for perhaps longer than our museum or the physical specimen will actually exist. In addition to that, you can compare all of these points against previous years and learn, again, how climate change is impacting routes, migration behavior, and environmental and human impacts. So, to put that into another real-world perspective, this is Lake Michigan just a year ago. This was 5th of March, so just a couple of weeks previously. Lake Michigan looks nothing like that this year, but last year, for the first time in perhaps a century, Lake Michigan was still frozen a mile out from the shore because we had just a terribly cold and frigid winter. I don't recommend staying in Chicago during the winter, and that's somebody who grew up in South Dakota and lived here in Montana, and Chicago is too much. Just too much. So you wouldn't think it would be that big of a deal. What, we're having an exceptionally cold year. What does that mean? Well, all of these birds and all of these ducks and waterfowl, which traditionally would migrate through this time of year, came the same time they did every year, found that the lake was frozen, and then you had problems where they're shallow divers. So they're expecting to go maybe 5 or 10 deep into the water, deep into the water to graze on the mollusks and the algae and whatever else is kind of at that level of depth, but they can't because it's frozen. So we just had a massive die-off, just a huge starvation, and this was mirrored all the way from where we are in Chicago all the way up through Michigan. So we were able to call up our other museums and comparative collections and be like, hey, you guys seeing this? And everybody's like, yeah, I know. This hasn't happened for like the last 80 years. So that becomes incredibly important to save these birds and to put them in the collection. I know it's a dead bird picture, it's not super uplifting. That being said, here's another dead bird. But that's the point of the talk, right? What good is a dead bird? This is a crane that smashed into a Black Hawk helicopter. And if you really want to talk about damages that are having an impact on the American taxpayer, bird strikes cause $400 to $500 million in damages every year to airlines. And that's private airlines and also commercial airlines, and that's only in the United States. Who would have thought that a bird just flying as it does could be that impactful? And what's even more scary about this is that bird strikes have resulted in the death of more than 200 people since the 1980s. Like, that's frightening. So how can we solve that? How can we mitigate some of these issues? Well, there is actually an entire department at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History called the Feather Identification Lab. And what they do is they work with airline companies who will, take samples of either a feather or just whatever visceral parts they can collect. Because a bird runs into a plane engine, there's not much left of it. You can't really identify it. So these guys are like bird CSI. And they'll take that information and they'll run the genes and they'll take samples or they'll take feathers and compare them to their morphological collections and inform the airlines what birds are flying into these planes the most, which ones are having the most impact and creating the most damages. And so we're actually engineering our planes and we're actually teaching our pilots how to fly differently in order to prevent these damages. Not just to the birds, but to the planes and to the people. And it's also, once you start to learn more about bird behavior, you can do things like fire off fireworks to scare the birds out of ponds or make sure there aren't any ponds near airports. So these are all, none of this would be possible without museum comparative collections. And these are, like the collection at Smithsonian has been built up over hundreds of years. So another reason you should care in particular about the Phil Wright Museum is that we all know Montana is huge, absolutely massive. And I have circled on this map the active natural history research collections in the western U.S. And this may not be a 100% accurate map. I was thinking of ones kind of off that I'm familiar with. But you can see that our collection here, not only is it the state repository for vertebrate collections in Montana, but it also serves a massive geographic region where if you're a biologist and you want to learn about agriculture or what specimen or what species are invasive, what's having an impact on your local agriculture, if you're from South Dakota, your best bet is to go to Minneapolis, which you can only get so many samples because now that's a metropolitan area, or you could come to Montana. I mean, that's a 13-hour drive. I used to do that drive. It's pretty long. And so it is really important that we continue to maintain this collection and to continue adding on to it so we can see change over time, not just for the state of Montana, but for the entire northern Rocky Mountains. I mean, the Phil Wright Museum is the largest collection of northern Rocky Mountain wildlife in the world. It's not like you can find this collection down in San Francisco. They couldn't care less about doing annual collections of things in Montana. So another reason is that everything that how many birders do we have? I mean, it's a bird series, but how many guys go out and watch birds? See, everything everything that's published in one of these birds guides is inferred from museum collections. So as much as you would want to go out and you spot a bird, you spot one of these varied thrushes, and you're like, I was here at this river at this time of year, and I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to send that to Sibley. Well, Sibley's not actually going to use that because that's just anecdotal information. He can't actually derive anything from that because you saw it for an instant or it's a fleeting photograph. He has to go to a museum collection and look at the recorded information on the specimen tags to figure out where that bird was collected and at what time. And that's how he makes these distribution maps. And that's how he learns about the color and the color variation of these birds. And there's one that flew into a window, so to bring it all full circle, here's a window kill that was collected by Eric Green, and I felt that bird when it was still warm. That's maybe an unnecessary anecdote, but I remember him bringing this bird into the collection and realizing, like, this is one specimen, but it carries so much information along with it. It might still be in the freezer in the Phil Wright Museum. I could probably go prepare it later, but, you know, haven't done that. And again, to bring it back home, here's a picture, a snapshot from one of the drawers of Western meadowlarks from the Phil Wright collection. These are examples of birds that have been collected over the last 100 years by Morton John Elrod. You guys are familiar with Elrod. He was a founding biologist and responsible for establishing our biological program here at the museum, or here at the campus. So Morton Elrod has one of the center specimens. C.F. Hedges was, I'm not sure if he was a biologist, but he was a physician who was incredibly interested in birding, and he contributed a large number of local species to the collection. And then there's one by Phil Wright and some of Phil Wright's contemporaries. So this is an amazing range of dates and examples, and you can infer so much information from these specimens, should someone have access to them. And I'll just close with an anecdote. One of my projects as an intern at the Field Museum was that I found a couple cassette tapes, and they had a recorded interview with Phil Wright in 1991 that hadn't been listened to, probably since it was recorded, and it was conducted by a student from the Montana Kaiman. And I wanted to transcribe it, so first I had to actually find a cassette player, because that actually proved to be more difficult than it needed to be. So I went through the tapes, and it was, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. If you get a chance to go over to the Michael Maureen Mansfield Library, you can actually request a digital copy and read through this interview and get a copy of the audio recording, because Phil Wright goes into such incredible detail of history of the place. But one of the most poignant things he says, and you can hear it like in his voice, is that he was asked what the future of the collection would be. He was close to retirement, and the future of the museum had kind of been hazy for quite a few decades. And it was just hearing, I had never met the man, and here I was trying to take care of his collection, and he just said, I have nightmares about all of this material going to pot, you see. And it was so heartbreaking for me. So having a connection with somebody like Phil Wright through that and feeling an obligation to carry on his legacy and to carry on the collection was something that continues to inspire me in the work that I do today, and it's the reason why I care so much about the value of dead birds. So thank you so much for coming out. I'm gonna
Before we open up for questions for Emily, I just want to remind you that after the question period, there's going to be a reception down at the far end, and we've spent the afternoon bringing over a bunch of really interesting specimens from the Phil Wright Museum. So you'll be able to see some really, really neat stuff that's part of this collection that Emily's been talking about. Before we do that, I want to introduce Charlie Jansen, who's the Associate Dean of the Division of Biological Sciences, and he's got a little announcement to make.
This is sort of by way of a public service announcement, I guess. I hope that Emily's talk has made you all believers in interest, value, and even the beauty of museum specimens and collections. At the University of Montana, as you've heard, we really are fortunate to have our own vertebrate museum, and that museum has been used in many of the talks that we heard tonight. The museum is named after Phil Wright, who was a professor in the Division of Biological Sciences for a very long time, I think almost 30 years. And he was a very well recognized character, the teacher of some required but often very fondly thought of courses. And he was really the director and the person who built up and steered the direction of the Vertebrate Museum for over 30 years. Now, we're very fortunate to have in our audience specimens tonight. Both Dr. Wright's son, Alden Wright, and Dr. Wright's wife, Hedwig. I'm sure they could give you personal testimonials about the incredible passion that Phil had for the museum. The Wright family, has also been very generous in supporting some other activities in honor of Phil, including some Fly Valley Audubon Society scholarships in Phil's name. So throughout all the years that Dr. Wright and his students and his now successors have built up the collection has now gotten to the point where, as you may have inferred from some of the slides, it's really bursting at the seams. We have far too little space to store and certainly to exhibit most of our specimens. We really have no place to exhibit them at all. And many of the cabinets in which the specimens are stored are over 50 years old and are beginning to fall apart. They're old wooden cabinets. The wood has shrunk, seams have opened up, and bugs get in. And just like the animals will get fed on by insects and other things if they die in nature, even once they're preserved in a museum, if insects get in, they can damage the specimens and you lose all that information that was contained in the specimen. So we now have this wonderful opportunity to move the collection into a new space and to put it all in new cabinets which will preserve the specimens, make them easier to access, and will allow the collection to grow for the next century. So the collection is now over a century old. We'd like to give it the opportunity to continue to inform and inspire research for the entire next century. The university has generously made the space available to us, set aside space for the new museum space, but we have to raise the funds to renovate the space and to buy the new cabinets. So we need your help in raising these funds for the new museum in Dr. Wright's memory. If you are willing to help support the museum, please come find us. We'll be at the reception, Dan Fletcher and I, and we will have some donation envelopes and stuff, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. But we hope that we can count on your help to allow the museum to prosper and grow for the next century. Thanks so much.
Thanks. We'll now open it up for questions. And if you've got a question, put your hand up. There's 3 circulating microphones, and just wait until the mic gets to you.
Thanks. Can I answer? Do I know everything? Hi. Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah.
You were recently, I believe, in South America looking for birds. Could you talk a little bit about your trip to South America, Latin America?
Yeah, so the question was, I was recently in South America looking for birds, and that was actually an expedition that was to accompany our conservation team at the field museums. They're called the Action Center. It's like a group of superheroes that are scientists. And these are individuals who are experts in their field who will go to an uncharted area of the rainforest. Because believe it or not, with the internet and GPS and everything, there still are areas of our planet that are little researched, little studied. So I accompanied this group, which included 4 expert ornithologists, and documented the ways in which they learn about the biodiversity of this area. So essentially, there are a number of ways that they were doing so. Some was observational. You have people like Doug Stotts, who wrote the book Birds of Peru, and I got to go film with him, which is pretty exciting. And he will chase flocks, mixed species flocks. So he can, like, with his supersonic hearing, he actually kind of is a superhero. He can hone in on one of these flocks that are passing overhead, drop this stuff on the trail, and run off into the jungle, just with a pencil and a pad of paper to document what it is that he sees, and he'll observe things. So it was everything from Doug's approach to it to Ernesto Ruelas is another ornithologist, and he had some pretty high-powered sound equipment that we would go off, and you would walk, and you'd walk, and you'd stop, and you'd be very quiet. The video isn't exceptionally exciting, but it is very thorough. So the purpose of that is just to expand the ranges of known species. And for you bird nerds out there, the most exciting thing that we observed was that we actually had a white-winged potu that was hanging out in our camp. And this was, white-winged potu is a rare bird that hadn't been seen in the region, and what we realized was probably over a century, thought to have been extinct in the area. So that was compelling. And you can check out some of those videos on our channel, on the Brain Scoop on YouTube. We'll send you a link. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody? With the microphone.
What brought you to Montana?
What brought me to Montana? Honestly, the beauty. I grew up, I mentioned I was born and raised in South Dakota. And I loved the state, but I wasn't in love with the universities. So I wanted to stay in the area. I wanted to study in a place that was as enriching in its nature as it was in its academia. And I did find that here at the university. I really appreciate the degree that I was offered and the opportunities presented. But, you know, flying in for the first time, if you've never, I had never been to Montana before I was checking out schools. And I'll never forget the plane ride coming in over the mountains and turning around to land in the airport, and you see Mount Sentinel and then Old Main perched at the bottom, and I said, I'm gonna come here. And my mom said, we should really check out Bozeman, and I was like, oh, fine. But I signed my admission papers the day I landed here. I fell in love, absolutely.
Speaking of Bozeman, which...
Bozeman's great!
Yeah, it's the sister university or brother university, or however you want to call it, down there in Bozeman, where I went for my master's, because they were willing to give me a teaching assistantship, and I couldn't afford to go without something like that.
Absolutely.
Years and years and years ago. But, and I don't know if this happened when you were here, but it might have, but Bozeman, and I majored in wildlife, but I've always loved bugs, you know.
Yeah.
So I was always in there, you know, in the insect collection there, talking to the person who managed the insect collection at MSU at the time, and we got to be lifelong friends and everything. But I know that because of that, at one point in the not very long ago, UM's insect collection went to Bozeman.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, because I've also been in the drawers, loving places like this. And by the way, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and we used to have our annual school trips down to the Chicago Museum of Natural History.
That's
awesome
great.
place. But I know that MSU also had a vertebrate collection.
Yeah.
Did that come to Missoula?
The vertebrate collection?
Yeah, they're birds and they're small mammals.
No, they retained that there, I think primarily because they use it for teaching purposes. But I do know that, again, Morton Elrod, our founding biologist here, he was an avid collector of insects, and we had a pretty robust entomological collection here on campus for a number of years. But then, as you mentioned, it did go to Bozeman. We still have one little butterfly that was collected here in Missoula. Again, that's on display in the little case in the Health Sciences building, so you can check that out. But yeah, they have a fantastic entomology program there.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I was sorry to see the insects go there since I live here, but I'm glad they're staying in Montana.
That is a great mentality. I agree.
I was wondering if the Brain Scoop YouTube is being picked up by schools, elementary, high school.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes it depends. Our biggest barrier is that a lot of schools have blocked YouTube as a website. So that's actually proven to be more challenging than you would think it is to actually get into schools. But I am in contact with science teachers in and around the Chicago area, and I know they try to integrate our episodes into their programming. It's hard to measure that kind of thing unless I get an email from a science teacher, but I have young fans who write from all over saying that, you know, it's the kind of thing that they watch with their parents at night. Believe it or not, wolf dissection is a family-friendly affair. So. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'll talk to you later because I used to work at the Field Museum and I used to work for Dave Dyer, so
what?
It's kind of awesome. But the only reason I bring that up is I know that the Field Museum, like a lot of academic institutions, has been plagued by financial problems and trying to to allocate those monies best to both education as well as the important research they do.
Sure.
And I'm just kind of curious, as you mentioned, it's unmeasurable how many students you've affected, but in the year and a half you've been out there, have you seen more buy-in from Illinois legislatures or even just the board understanding that this isn't just a place for people to come see really cool stuff.
Yeah.
This is a place where real science happens every day.
Well, that was the primary objective in hiring me. So a lot of people think it's a bit counterproductive or counterintuitive that when the Field Museum is going through a financial crisis, the first thing they're going to do is hire an amateur with an art degree to talk about their research. It actually proved to be a pretty good strategic plan, and one that is growing very well. It's unfortunate. Every museum and every collection deserves to have all of their research funded. I don't know in terms of appealing to Illinois legislature, because we all know the politics in Illinois are so honest and genuine in their attempts to better themselves. But I can say with confidence that our Board of Trustees is incredibly interested in the Brain Scoop, both is using it as a marketing tool for the museum, but really as one of the best, if not the best, outlets to talk to our scientists. I mean, I'm an in-house reporter, so if anybody has anything exciting happening, it can be something that we talk about for a number of months, and they can be patient with me as I learn taxonomy, which is a bit over my head, or it can be something as immediate as someone is doing the unveiling of a mummy to stabilize it before it can travel for conservation, and then we just grab our cameras and go. So it's not, I mean, it's not hard to see the value in a program like the Field, and or the Brain Scoop, and I'm also really proud to say that a lot of other museums are in touch with us to try to figure out how we can replicate that kind of thing, how we can get an in-house reporter to work with and interact with our scientists to better serve the message to the public. I can't really see that many hands if there are any just waving. I'm sure. Yeah, there's another question over there.
Since nobody else has asked it yet, do you still have time to do art for yourself?
I don't have time to execute it, but I sure have a lot of time to dream about what I will do when I do have the time. You know, art is one of those amazing things where I went into it thinking like, art school is going to teach me how to be the best artist ever. And what art school taught me is actually the tools to interpret what it is I want to communicate, not what I could communicate, if that makes sense. So you don't really, in my experience, I didn't have anything to make art about until I went to a place like the Phil Wright Museum, and all of a sudden now I have my subject, and I, you know, with a little bit of practice you can hone your skills and polish them up. But I've got a portfolio that lives in my brain that I'm going to work on someday. Yeah.
I wasn't planning on doing this, but you gave such an inspiring talk tonight.
Thank you.
And like a short, as the museum specimens demonstrated.
Thanks.
That I would like to encourage the group here, because my life is to catalyze other folks to give, that I'm going to give $10,000 because you're here to the Phil Wright Museum, who I knew Phil quite well, but I'll match it to whoever tonight we raise up to $25,000. I'll match that. You clap, but talk is cheap. I love you all, but talk is cheap. That's for tonight's country. And I do it because of you. You're a wonderful catalyst. And I also want to encourage you, please, to come back. Not necessarily permanently, but though we'd love that, but to catalyze also, I think, the future of the museum here and its outreach. And I think with your help, it would have so much more power than it is sitting in a little closet on the second floor of Health Sciences. So $10,000 for you tonight, $25,000 up to anybody who matches me tonight, or I'm talking about collectively. This isn't me, this is my family. We're just trying to make sure we put a serious dent in making sure the Phil Wright Museum lives in the museum, and that Montana rocks.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was curious if you're finding that a lot of your fans are young girls.
They are. Actually, yeah. Woo! When you do woo, young girls, that sounds a little weird. Yeah. Yeah, women in science woo. No, you know, one of our biggest demographics is young women between the ages of 13 and 17. It's actually like 30% of our audience, which, you know, it's not a majority, but it's a significant number. And I give a whole other talk. I give a talk to a women's studies course today because I do think there's an incredible value in promoting science and scientists in the media, and there's a lack of representation of female scientists in the media. That's a bummer. Other than Miss Frizzle and the occasional reality TV star, there isn't really anybody out there who is Bill Nye or Neil Tyson or even on the same level of, no offense, the Green Brothers. So I've taken incredible pride and sense of responsibility in being somebody like that. Because if what I can do can inspire future generations of scientists, men or women, that is the best legacy I could ever hope for. So I'm strongly encouraged by it. I actually met a girl named Vera on Friday before I came out here. It was Vera's 6th birthday, and she had told her mom the only thing she wanted for her birthday was to meet Emily Graslie. So her mom and I arranged a surprise meeting, and it actually ended terribly because I went up and to surprise Vera, and she was so overwhelmed she just sobbed for 45 minutes. And I felt horrible. She was so overwhelmed, and she just was shaking, and then she got so tired she just fell asleep. So I can't honestly say if I'm having a good impact, but I try, and so this one's for you for a happy birthday. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked for DBS in the early 90s.
Hold the mic up.
Is this better? Oh.
Yes, thank you.
Those ones. Anyway, I worked for DBS doing photography in a dark room on the 2nd floor of the Health Sciences Building. And it was serendipitous that tonight Ken Dial supports the museum. And the reason that I really am fond of the museum is because Ken used to fly his birds, learning how they fly, down that corridor in the Health Sciences Building.
Really, Ken?
And I never knew, when I walk out of my dark room, if I was going to get hit by a bird. And I never had that problem with birds in the museum.
There you go. I mean, you know, job hazards. That's a good story.
All right, please help me thanking Emily for coming all the way from Chicago to wrap this up. There is free wine and goodies down the hall. There's some amazing specimens from the Phil Wright collection. And all 6 of the people who have spoken in this seminar series are going to be down the hall as well. So we invite you, if you've got time, to go down and mingle and enjoy some of the specimens, and feel free to talk to any of us. And and Dan Pletcher, can you stand up?
If you want to take advantage of Dr. Dial's very generous offer, please come and see me, see Ken, see Charlie Jansen, or any of the 6 speakers.
So Dan has been working, Dan Pletcher, the former director of the Wildlife Biology Program, has been working really hard the last year or so to help raise money to make sure that the Phil Wright Museum and the legacy goes on. All right, thanks. We'll see you down the hall.